Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you in Paris for the 5th edition of the Dialogue of Continents that we are hosting with our founding partners, the CEP, SRM. And this year we are bringing together two more partners, the Astana Club and the Institute for the World Economic and Politics. This is a great pleasure to see you, all of you here in person after almost 2 years where we have to do this event online. This is indeed a very important time, not only for the global economy, but for the world. The last G20 meeting of the year showed that major world economies are refusing to enter an era of war. Global governance is indeed in search of a new model. Is it capable of reinventing itself? How should we proceed? This is, almost the theme of our topics today, the end of abundance and the birth of resilience. Where is the world economy headed? Beyond the geopolitical tension and the inefficiency of global governance, it is also appropriate to question the economic health of the world. Will the year 2023 be synonymous with recessions? Does the succession of global crises, pandemic, renewed geopolitical tension signal a shift to a new era for the global economy and international relations, marked by chronic shortages, persistent inflation, and friendly shoring, the economic decoupling of the free world from the authoritarian world? Is the European Union caught up in a new tumult of history, capable of meeting all the challenges we face? Finally, can Central Asia, a region that will gain its strategic value in 2022, given its desire to emancipate itself from Russia and Chinese, find a way to continue its rapprochement with the West without hindrance? How can connectivity with the European Union be improved, especially in this context? Thank you for all of you, speakers, participants who have accepted our invitation, but also I want to special thank also to the Jacob Zuckerman Institute for Global Economics, who have also providing support and partnership for this event. And it's a great pleasure to welcome our friend from Kazakhstan, Central Asia, for what we believe will be a very important conversation, and we look forward for it. Thank you very much.
So, dear friends, the results of forums such as ours are sure to be reported to decision-making centers. I hope that our discussions and suggestions that will be made will help our governments and politicians to solve existing problems, find compromises, and perhaps even resolve military conflicts. I sincerely hope for an interesting and fruitful discussion today over the next 2 days. So welcome to our forum. Thank you.
Just a year ago, if we spoke about inflation, we would have been chased out of the room as being obsolete. After all, inflation is like smallpox, we were told. It has been eradicated. And therefore, what are you worried about? If we have a problem, it's a problem of deep secular stagnation, deflation, implosion, lack of growth. In this current period, in so many areas in life, in politics, in economics, in medicine, in everywhere else, we are in a risk management approach. Yeah. We do not know the distributions, we do not know outcomes, but we have to make decisions.
And yet other countries, it is about, of course, public debt, which has been elevated for a very long period of time and does not show any signs of coming down yet. Well, it's very clear that now that financing costs are on the rise, it simply means that balance sheets will have to adjust. And that these parties that sort of have taken on these high amounts of leverage, they will have to prepare for a future which, in my view, will hold higher interest rates, not only temporarily, but I do think for a much longer period of time.
We have seen so many target-setting exercises, just like Net Zero 2050 we are doing now. All countries have come up with a political statement for net zero. How reliable are they? This is the kind of failures we have been repeatedly fooling ourselves. Then how can we? What was the main reason why the NDC or target setting was not successful? I think by this time, after so many repeated failures, I think it's time for us to reflect on what went wrong,
the combination of extremely cheap renewables in North Africa and high demand for decarbonization of industrial sector in particular in Europe means only one thing, which is hydrogen and ammonia. And the ammonia transition will happen through the shipping industry first, because they'll need it for long distance fuel, but it's also an energy carrier and the key to the decarbonization of.
For summer, engaging with particularly the private sector in terms of resilience, with liquidity provision, as I said, on key sectors, in close coordination with the Ukrainian authorities. So that was agribusiness, that was pharmaceutical, that was transport and logistics. And also state-owned enterprises dealing with vital infrastructure, which is essential for preserving economic activities such as railway, gas, and electricity. And as the war has been evolving, and as I said before, Mark, we are already engaging in reconstruction, because that's what we think is necessary at this point in time, particularly after the more recent change in the strategy by Russia attacking civil infrastructure. So we need to respond, and we are working very closely with the Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian SOEs to identify where the needs are.
Primarily about the short term, because we are in a wartime economy, and wartime economic management differs quite substantially from normal economic management. And so one key difference, if there's one key difference that I would point out in this short statement, and I would say that in a wartime economy, weapons and defense plays a very special role. It's not just about the war itself and making sure that we recapture our lost territories or territories that are currently under occupation, but it's the best and most efficient and most important form of economic stimulus.
I think that, and also the Ukraine crisis has shown that we can, and also the COVID crisis has shown that when we're confronted with challenges, we can unite and we can address some issues. I think the risk we are facing now is that the dilution of European power and the, let's say, the fact that we are that we have difficulties to catch up with Chinese economy, US economy, and emerging economies. This goes gradually, and it's not suddenly a crisis. I think that's one of the difficulties we are facing.
Which is the age of resilience. In fact, it's about the necessity to build resilience. Because, yes, the background is unpredictability. We live in a new normal. The new normal is unpredictability. The main drivers of our immediate future which are also examples of unpredictability, is the war in Ukraine, of course, and I would add the incapacity to understand, although I've learned a lot during the first panel with the former central bank governors. It's still, I think, the incapacity to understand the causes of the persistence of inflation.
What is unique about technologies is that we cannot envision technologies that will be developed 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or 30 years from now. But what we learn from human history is that, in fact, when humanity is in need for certain type of technologies, human ingenuity is there to generate these technologies. So again, when I think about the future, I have great confidence in human ingenuity. And I think human ingenuity will be there. I cannot specify the technologies, as people 20 years ago, 40 years ago could not envision the technologies that we use at the moment. But based on human ingenuity, I think that in fact we will be able to overcome what we define the limits of growth, and in fact we will be able to grow in a sustainable fashion, and in fact even more rapidly than what we do today.
When you, for example, you see the flow of the payment from Tunisia, from France, for example, to Tunisia, you can feel that there's more than $1.1 billion, I think, flowing from France to Tunisia. And it was very important during the COVID crisis. Why? Because I think today the remittances are higher than the flow coming from the tourism sector. It's very, very important, and it has reached 4.5% of our GDP.
Former President of the Commission, Juncker, famously said that Europe is a payer, not a player, and this needs to be changed because it is impacting, as I said, our competitiveness, but it's also impacting what we believe was European leadership in terms of norms and regulations in the world. BRI impact went far beyond the economic one, of course. It impacted sustainability. There is a famous discussion on fiscal sustainability, but also environmental and social sustainability of the projects, and a new or alternative norm setting.
We should find solutions. We should look at least EU Central Asia, maybe EU Kazakhstan, and right now it's just anecdotal that the president Tokayev was re-elected last week, had the inauguration on Saturday. On Monday, yesterday, he was in Moscow. Right now, he's here. He's meeting with President Macron as we're speaking. So this is what we're trying to do, is just to ensure the diplomacy and transportation infrastructure work in unison and add to this common good.
If we want to create an anti-fragile world, in the Nassim Taleb definition, I think that we need to create a hyper-connected world, not a lower connected world, a hyper-connected world which allows reconfiguration of connectivity as conflicts emerge, as situations emerge, to be able to react and stay resilient. So I think that working on connectivity is an essential an essential challenge that we need to work on.
China has been benefiting from the last round of globalization. This time, probably China should take more responsibility to think about rebuilding a new world system that can just take in all the conflicts, right, that have arisen from the last round of globalization. But we don't need to go to decoupling. And actually, data do not support that the world is being decoupled, right? Particularly between China and the US, between China and Europe.
The US can certainly do more to support intra-regional cooperation, and it already does through its C5+1 engagement. And the idea is that by promoting intra-regional trade, connectivity, and cooperation on other areas, you're building a stronger, more resilient region. And I think this is more important than ever with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. We haven't seen any change really in the Taliban. We see the policies toward women as backward as they were in the 1990s, maybe even worse, with women above the age of 12 not being allowed to go to school, simply unheard of. No other country in the world has ever tried to limit females' access to education. And in terms of counterterrorism, we see that the Taliban's still linked to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. So it's a dangerous region, it's a dangerous country, and it's more important than ever that the US engage with the countries of the region, build up their counterterrorism capacities, and encourage the countries to work together against extremism and terrorism.
From a political and economic point of view, it means that we know how to adapt. And that's a question of political structure and political resilience, I think, in the world we live in. That the challenge, and we're not wanting to anticipate what anybody else might say, is that governments can be very resilient. It's when problems come in waves and they come quickly. So if you had a choice, you probably wouldn't be wanting the war in Ukraine to happen at the same time when monetary policy has produced 14 years of basically free money from central bankers. You probably wouldn't want it with COVID and the debt that's put onto developed nations and the political, economic and social problems it's put onto the developing world or the global south, low-income countries, I think a better word. And so the problem is the cascade of being able to adapt at fast pace.
One of the most important topics I can identify and suggest here is how Europe and Asia can discuss to collaborate, to materialize and operationalize synergy between economic growth and climate action. So this is one area of Greater Eurasia Dialogue. The other one, which I would like to propose, is the Silk Road Supergrid.
What does that mean? It means that if you have China is going to become stronger, it's going to become more aggressive in Asia and globally, trying to assert its own power. But if China becomes weaker, could also become more aggressive in Asia and try to take over Taiwan because it has to find an external enemy. And by the way, China has territorial disputes not only over Taiwan, but also with Japan, with the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and India. So if global conflict, hot war may occur, actually the starting point more than in Europe with Russia there might be actually in Asia, given the types of territorial disputes that China has with a number of countries.
We are really in the third millennium, which is totally reshaping the world in a variety of senses. And we've been used in Europe to basically growing prosperity, life is getting better, and yes, there have been some bumps in the road. There's been the 2008 financial crisis, there was the war in Syria, big migration crisis in 2015, then came Brexit, but on the other side, we never thought that anything could really fundamentally change. And I think that this is really changed dramatically in terms of our expectations, because our sense of security was not only already shattered by some of these events beforehand, but the outbreak of COVID-19 has really made a huge difference. And no one has mentioned this, and I was very surprised that it hadn't been mentioned before. But we were woefully unprepared to pandemics, because when you look at it, there's over 6 million people lost their lives in the world.
I think we need public support in all we do, because public support is a center for gravity. If you don't have public support in what you do in terms of nuclear disarmament and nuclear and arms control, non-proliferation, you go nowhere. So we need public support. At the same time, we have a public opinion that seems to now believe that getting nuclear weapon gives you a license for aggression, or a safety for yourself, with regard to others.
At the end of the day, these horrific devices that we've created to bring about security are all about a loss of our humanity. The idea that in order to protect something that we've created, states, created in the 1640s to stop religious war in Europe, things that we've created, we're willing to put the entire future of humanity at risk.
The Budapest Memorandum, which was meant to protect once Kazakhstan had given up its nuclear arsenal, was meant to protect Belarus and Ukraine, was ignored by the US, Britain, and Russia. Simply ignored. Obviously, support's been provided, but the recommendations were given, and France and China actually made a sub-letter on that.
What I also witnessing personally is the decline of institution. So I think that we are in a period when the set of international institutions which have been created after the Second World War are not fit anymore for the purpose. And we have this crisis of institutions, and it is very hard to imagine in this fragmented world how to handle the new situation if our toolbox is getting outdated or we are not willing to use it for very different reasons.
What can be done besides the obvious? Raising public awareness, working with youth, talking to diplomats, talking to decision makers. What can be done to recognize that the world, that is a very complex mechanism today? Because look what we're looking at here. We're looking at health care policy failure, economic policy failure, nuclear failure, diplomatic failure, etc. It's a very complex mechanism in which competence and leadership together may be the answer to resolve these events and to prevent these birds.
I believe that European Union can speed up. The resilience indicators are now embedded in the new framework for the European semester that will be used starting 2023. We know in Europe, but not only, that companies that have chosen sustainability clearly, investing in innovation, they are exactly experimenting what the plan was about, not the entire industrial sector, which is at risk of being squeezed. This is clear. So I don't have a clear answer, but on the other hand, I believe that the only alternative to a sustainable world is an unsustainable world, which is exactly what we are talking about for 2 days.
In addition to these economic, monetary, and financial risks, some new, some old, some different, I realize we live in a world also in which there is a whole bunch of other threats. I call them mega threats because they are severe and have really macroeconomic consequences. We live in a world in which now there is a geopolitical depression. You have on one side 4 revisionist powers, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, that do not fully accept or reject even the kind of economic, trading, financial, but also political and geopolitical order the US, Europe, and the West created after World War II. There are, of course, risks deriving from global climate change. They're becoming more severe. The health risk coming from now recurrent pandemics. We have a risk of deglobalization and protectionism. We have all the risk coming from AI, machine learning, robotic automation, and the risk of permanent structural technological unemployment. And we've had this rise of economic malaise and income and wealth inequality that has now led to a backlash against liberal democracy.